Well, good morning, everybody. This is Wednesday, and we are beginning the month of May. So, as our school is winding down, I think our last day is the 17th. So, we're getting close. We are beginning episode 88 today, and this is the concluding episode on Conspirator number 3, which is the Cubans, the anti-Castro Cubans. And today I want to take a look at, yesterday we established the fact that the Cubans felt betrayed. The anti-Castro Cubans felt betrayed time and again. JFK kept over-promising, and in the end, at first he broke his promise to Khrushchev and kept his promise to the anti-Castro Cubans. And then after the Cuban Missile Crisis, which seems to be the line of demarcation in JFK's mind anyway, now he keeps his promise to Khrushchev and he breaks his promise to the anti-Castro Cubans. And so we went through all that, how he shut down Operation Mongoose and began back channeling negotiations with Castro. The Cubans lost their mind at that point. They said, you've betrayed us once too many times. And so today we want to look at the source of the anti-Castro's bitter hatred for JFK. Really, a better way to rephrase that question is just to give you some anecdotal evidence of that hatred, some of the quotes and some of the people who were affected by JFK's change in policy and decision making, and the recourses or to which they go, the links to which they'll go to get what they want. Okay, a couple pictures here. We've already looked at these. The first one is obviously the Bay of Pigs, and the second one, and that has never left. That the specter of the Bay of Pigs has hung over the Kennedys and I say Kennedys because I'm talking about both brothers, uh, from pretty much day one of his administration. And what really seals it, though, all these failures, this multitude of failures along the way, from Bay of Pigs to Cuban Missile Crisis, uh, and all the efforts to assassinate that failed, all the efforts to sabotage that failed, all the efforts to infiltrate, overthrow from within that failed. I mean, nothing worked. Nothing worked. Castro was a survivor, if nothing else. And it was just a constant thumb in the nose to JFK, to the government, the United States government, and to these anti-Castro Cubans. And then in the end, to be sold out, JFK is now negotiating with Castro through intermediaries. You see top picture there, Lisa Howard. She's one of the intermediaries. You see her picture below, sprawled across the bed. Jean Daniel is also there. His back is to us in the picture. And they're having some negotiations there with Castro. Of course, another one involved is William Atwood, former UN diplomat. It's tight with JFK, trustworthy guy. Problem for JFK is that the CIA has bugged all the phones of Atwood, Howard. They know all this is going on. And so to make life hell for JFK, they leaked this to the anti-Castro Cubans. So the essence of JFK's issues really stem from something we talked about yesterday. He's raised the hopes to an impossible level through his 1960 campaign promises, through his Bay of Pigs authorization. That there was some question whether the new president would even greenlight Bay of Pigs, and he did. And so once that happened, they thought, well, when it goes south, he'll authorize the air support and we'll invade, and that'll be that. Didn't happen. Then he changed his Operation 40 to Operation Mongoose. It says no time, money, or effort will be spared. So that he sort of doubled down. And then in 62, he makes that promise at the Orange Bowl. And so it's not like these anti-Castro Cubans are being unreasonable. Their expectation has been set by JFK's own words. And so, there was a choice to be made in 1960 in the campaign whether to support Kennedy or not. They already had Nixon in their pocket. Nixon was going to support this. So anyway, the decision was made to support Kennedy because he seemed even more supportive. But then ever since then, it's just been one betrayal after another. In the Bay of Pigs, he gets blamed, and he refused to authorize the additional air support. People don't distinguish that. He did authorize the original air support. They just didn't take care of all 10 of Castro's jets. They got 7 of them. And then they wanted him to go back, and he would have authorized that to go back before the operation began. They just chose not to do it. And then when they got into the operation, then they wanted the support. It was too late then. Then in the Cuban Missile Crisis, everyone is telling him to invade, to bomb the missile sites. And of course, he doesn't do that. Then he makes the promise to Khrushchev, shuts down Operation Mongoose, closes down the training bases, basically puts the enterprise of being an anti-Castro revolutionary out of business. That had been a thriving enterprise in South Florida, New Orleans, and Dallas for years. And then all of a sudden, JFK just shuts the whole thing down. And that's going to include CIA, that's going to include organized crime, and all these anti-Castro Cubans. And then he begins these secret negotiations. So it's one betrayal upon another. So this is what we really want to look at today, is the passion with which these anti-Castro Cubans feel betrayed. And remember now, I've mentioned this before, they were very passionate about their mission, about their cause, about what they believed in. That was overthrowing Castro and getting back into Cuba. And so at the beginning, when they felt like they had JFK's support, they were very passionate about him. But you got to be careful about passion because it can flip, and you can be opposed with equal passion and hated with equal passion. And they were bitter. Ruben Carbajal, friend of David Morales, who was, a longtime CIA covert operator, assassin. I mean, this guy did all the jobs, the dirty work that nobody else could do. And he'd been heavily involved in these efforts versus Castro. In a 2004 interview with David Talbot, Carbajal said, quote, "President Kennedy screwed up. He caused all these deaths at the Bay of Pigs. He pulled off the planes. The men got caught on the ground. You want me to respect a president like that? Or an asshole like his brother?" Ooh. Homer Echevarria is a Cuban exile leader who was negotiating, in the process of negotiating illegal weapons purchase. And I say illegal because all this is supposed to be shut down. All the gun running and stuff is supposed to be done. This is on November 21st, which should be a significant day. That's the day before JFK was killed. He's talking to a Secret Service informant, Thomas Mosley. He says, quote, "We will have plenty of money to finish this deal as soon as we take care of Kennedy." This is the day before the assassination. According to Mosley, Echevarria was being financed by mafia cash. So here you see again the intersection of these different conspirators. Mafia is paying for it. Anti-Castro Cubans are doing the dirty work. After the assassination, the Secret Service was going to investigate Echevarria for this. When Mosley comes back and reports what was said, that's a big clue to the Secret Service that the anti-Castro Cubans had some plans for JFK that involved an assassination. I mean, he didn't spell it out. He says, "We're going to take care of Kennedy," and the next day he's dead. So they want to investigate this, but the FBI, oh boy, here we go again. J. Edgar Hoover shuts it down. J. Edgar Hoover, well, he raises his head so many times in moments like this, where you see in the early moments after the assassination, there's a lead, and it's the FBI that shuts it down. That's really, when you talk about the deep state, that was our conspirator number one. The CIA had its role. in planning and carrying out the assassination, setting up Oswald, covering up during the Warren Commission through Allen Dulles. But the FBI had a deep role, and that was to cut off or tie off all these leads, these potential leads that could have led somewhere, and make sure the only evidence the Warren Commission get is what J. Edgar Hoover said right at the outset was that fit the narrative that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. It was a lone gunman, no conspiracy. Remember the memo from the Assistant Attorney General? American people must be satisfied that Oswald acted alone. There were no Confederates. They're still at large, and he would have been convicted at trial. All of the Justice Department, from the Assistant Director, the Assistant Attorney General to the FBI Director on down, are saying the same thing. So any lead that might lead them to conspirators or another direction, in this case, in the direction of the anti-Castro-Cubans, J. Edgar Hoover just ties it off, and investigation gets shut down. Nestor Castellanos, he's an anti-Castroite, who, he came from Cuba. He was a pretty prominent Cuban businessman at one point, and he's like all the others, ends up in Miami, and he is vehemently blaming JFK for what he called the United States government of, quote, non-interference with respect to the Cuban issue. So in his view, JFK is trying to take a hands-off approach, and he's not happy about it. And in the late 70s, when the House Select Committee was investigating, they found evidence that an undercover agent had witnessed Castellanos tell a meeting of anti-Castro-Cubans, quote, "We're waiting for Kennedy on the 22nd, buddy. We're going to see him in one way or another. We're going to give him the works when he gets to Dallas. Mr. Good old Kennedy. I wouldn't even call him President Kennedy. He stinks." So it's pretty clear there's no respect. I mean, you saw what Ruben Carbajal said. I couldn't respect that asshole. There's no way. And here I won't even call him president. So there's no respect. They've completely lost respect for the president. And this is the second one who's prominent in this anti-Castro Cuban community who's promising to take care of Kennedy. We're going to see him in one way or another. We're going to give him the works when he gets to Dallas. And even names the day on the 22nd. I mean, I don't know. It seems pretty obvious, what they're talking about. And this is all stuff that the FBI is aware of. This is stuff that the Secret Service is aware of because their informant overheard them say this. In this case, it's a House Select Committee investigation that undercovers another undercover agent who hears or witnesses Castellanos say this. This is all happening before the assassination even happens. They're not hiding it. It wasn't even a big secret amongst the anti-Castro-Cubans. There's several documents from the FBI and CIA assassination files that hint about what I just said, how widespread this foreknowledge of the president's murder was. On the 21st of November, a Cuban told Gregory Basilla, who's a San Antonio pharmacist, this is just a random Cuban talking to his pharmacist, that, quote, Kennedy will be killed in Dallas tomorrow. Okay. An informant told the FBI's Miami office that between 25,000 to 50,000 was being offered to assassinate the president. In other words, there was a bounty on his head. On the morning of the day, 22nd November, a CIA source in Spain, all the way over in Madrid, heard a former Cuban journalist say that, quote, Kennedy would be killed that day. I mean, this is not a big secret. Everybody in the anti-Castro Cuban community seems to know what's fixing to happen, which is one of the reasons why I put so much credence in Fabian Escalante. I've quoted him several times, and I don't hear a lot of JFK researchers talk about Fabian Escalante and his investigation. He did an investigation into the JFK assassination for Castro, his boss. Remember that Fabian Escalante was responsible to keep Castro alive. Something about Fabian Escalante, in my mind, registers as credible and legitimate and what's the word I'm looking for? Effective, I guess, or efficient. I mean, we tried 634 or 643, I don't remember the exact number, times to kill Castro, and Fabian Escalante kept him alive. So right there, the guy's competent. And one of the reasons why he's so competent is because he has the advantage of intelligence. We talked yesterday about the spies, the spy network that Castro had in Miami and elsewhere, so that guys like Fabian Escalante could do their job and protect Castro and also protect Cuba. And they did so successfully all these times, throughout all these years and these efforts because of the spy network. So then when the assassination happens, and we've seen how dishonest our investigation was, and for all the reasons. We've already seen that the French know what happened. Charles de Gaulle knows exactly what happened. And it turns out as he's talking to people in France, telling them what he thinks happened, as the years go by, he's proven more and more correct by the day. He basically called it. He said the American intelligence services, the security services, killed him in much the same way they tried to kill me in a motorcade. I mean, he just nailed it. That's in the days right after the assassination. Well, here's another one, Fabian Escalante, and he would be more plugged in than Charles de Gaulle because this guy has access to all these anti-Castro Cubans, and he's got his spies who have infiltrated all their groups. He knows what they're talking about, what they're planning in real time. So when JFK gives him the task of not JFK. When Castro gives him the task of investigating the JFK assassination, I think the book that he wrote, here you see it, The Secret War, the conclusions he reached are way more credible than the Warren Commission, who we've already seen it was contaminated from the beginning. It began with a conclusion and then just sought to reinforce that conclusion. They were not trying to arrive at a conclusion that was based on evidence. Every step of the way, the FBI's shoehorning the evidence to make Oswald the guilty party and to exempt the CIA, to exempt organized crime, to exempt the anti-Castro Cubans, and certainly to protect LBJ and the Secret Service and everything. All right. And that's all because of domestic politics. But, Fabian Escalante doesn't have a dog in this fight, really. He's just trying to get to the bottom of it so that the Cuban government can deal honestly with what happened. They know who they're dealing with in the United States now. So Fabian does something that none of our investigations did, with the exception of a civil case with Marita Lorenz naming E. Howard Hunt, but it names names. Fabian Escalante names names. He says, okay, one of the scene coordinators on this, these are all CIA guys. So he's naming names from U.S. governmental agencies here. So that doesn't take a genius to extrapolate that out and decide who he's blaming this on. These are not rogue CIA agents either. These are leaders in the CIA, okay? Frank Sturgis was a long time, obviously, a CIA operator in the anti-Castro movement, Operation Mongoose. Goes all the way forward to Watergate. Right? Gets arrested at the Watergate Hotel. He was, according to Fabian Escalante, a scene coordinator and was on the scene as, according to him, Tramp B. Remember the famous Tramp photo? I've included it here at the bottom. Tramp B, which would be the second guy in line there, the tall, appears that he's the tallest guy. E. Howard Hunt is behind him, this little short guy. These are the guys that were arrested and hauled through Dealey Plaza afterwards. Interesting, I heard Fletcher Prouty talking about this and how they're being led to the county sheriff's building by Dallas police officers, which makes no sense. They'd be taken to Dallas police headquarters if it was a Dallas police officer who was arresting them. But that's not where they were led. They were led to the sheriff's office and then quietly released, but not before they were led through the area, and a lot of people got sight of it. And of course, the way they're dressed, and they were found hiding in a boxcar. These three, quote, tramps. And according to Fabian Escalante, uh, they were actually coordinating the scene. And of course, we already know E. Howard Hunt has admitted to being there and said he was a bench warmer in the event. So he was waiting to do backup work if necessary. Frank Sturgis has already confessed to being there. So this isn't a reach by Fabian Escalante to say Frank Sturgis was there. L. Fletcher Prouty, who examined this photograph, and this is not a good view of the photograph. It needs to be widened out a little bit. And there is another version of this. I wish I'd put this in this slideshow, but it shows another man walking with his back to the camera, passing these three, and they're all making eye contact with him. L. Fletcher Prouty worked for years under a guy named Lansdale, and that was his boss. And I told you yesterday that Lansdale, according to L. Fletcher Prouty, was in Dallas that day. He had just retired from the Air Force on the 31st of October, so just days earlier. And Lansdale, of course, Fletcher Prouty had been the guy, the liaison between all the CIA and Joint Chiefs in all those covert ops in Iran and Guatemala, elsewhere in Cuba. So he knew, Lansdale was very pivotal in all these covert ops, and that was his boss. And he swears on a stack of Bibles that guy who was walking with his back to the camera turns just briefly and looks at these three, and they kind of make eye contact with him. He swears, and he sent the photo to a bunch of other people that worked with Lansdale and asked them without saying what he thought, who they thought it was. And everybody came back and said the same thing. That's Lansdale. And wish I could show that photo. I don't have it, but you can kind of see the back of him on the left side there, on the right side of the photo. You can see the left side of him. According to Fletcher Prouty, that was his boss, Lansdale, walking by the three tramps, who turn out to be, in his view, Frank Sturgis, E. Howard Hunt, and another Cuban who was in the front. And these guys are sort of helping to coordinate the whole scene, as is Lansdale. And they're walking by each other. And the Dallas police officer is leading them to the sheriff's office, which is an unusual place to take, and upon which they're going to be released. And there'll be no record of their arrest. David Atlee Phillips, according to Fabian Escalante, met with what was Maurice Bishop, and who we heard was corroborated by Antonio Veciano, the leader of Alpha 66. He said that's all he knew him by was Maurice Bishop. Met with him hundreds of times, got paid a bunch of money to start Alpha 66. And of course, we already learned because Richard Case Nagel, it was Alpha 66 that had decided to kill the president and set Oswald up to take the fall for it. And so he says David Atlee Phillips was involved in his role as the CIA's Western Hemisphere station chief down in Mexico City, was to set up Oswald. He was doing a lot of the disinformation. That was what his specialty was. He was a disinformation expert, and he was creating the cover story that was going to convict Oswald in the eyes of the American people. And of course, that famous Mexico City story, part of it, which fell apart. It was sloppy the way they put that story together. But anyway, he was involved. Richard Helms, who led the CIA's anti-Cuban covert ops in the CIA and later became the director of the CIA, was involved. General Charles Cabell, the former deputy director of the CIA, who was fired by JFK after Bay of Pigs and was the brother of the Dallas mayor, Earl Cabell, was involved. This is Fabian Escalante naming names of CIA participants. And of course, left unsaid in there was the name Alan Dulles, who's at the time, just recently, not that long ago, was the director of the CIA and launched all these operations and was sort of the pseudo director, even though he wasn't the director officially. Everybody was reporting to him back at his house in Washington, and then gets appointed to the Warren Commission afterwards by LBJ to cover all this up. He also names organized crime names, all the names that we've become familiar with: Santos Trafficante, Sam Giancana, Johnny Rosselli, Carlos Marcello. Three of these are heads of crime families in their own right. Marcello in Louisiana and Texas, Giancana in Chicago. Of course, the Dealey Plaza was just crawling with Chicago people. And Santos Trafficante, the Don of the organized crime family in Florida and Cuba. And of course, Johnny Rosselli, who was the liaison between the CIA and the mob and all their efforts to poison and assassinate Castro and put the S-Force together, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we already know Johnny Rosselli was in Dallas that day as a spotter. And so flown in by Tosh Plumley. Tosh Plumley admits to it. Yeah, I flew him in. So we know Johnny Rosselli. We know Sam Giancana was there. Carlos Marcello himself was not there because remember, he was in a courtroom in New Orleans fighting off Bobby Kennedy and winning the court case there on the exact same day, November 22nd. But his people, remember all the interactions caught on FBI wiretaps between Santos and Carlos and their lawyer, Frank Regano, and Jimmy Hoffa, who's sitting in a prison cell. They're all conspiring to kill JFK. And afterwards, they're celebrating. And Jimmy Hoffa says, I knew they could do it. And Carlos Marcello sends word through Frank Regano, tell Jimmy he owes me big. So Fabian Escalante is saying that all these guys are involved. And then he names some Cuban exiles in Miami based on the spies information they gave him. Eladio Del Val was one of the shooters. If you remember, Eladio Del Val was the guy who died. Garrison wanted to depose him in the worst way for his trial in the Clay Shaw matter. And on the same day that David Ferry is found dead in New Orleans, Eladio Del Val is found dead in Miami when they took a hatchet to his head. Well, according to Fabian Escalante, Eladio Del Val was one of the shooters. Herminio Diaz was one of the shooters. These are Cuban exiles who were recruited. Herminio Diaz was one of the original S-Force members. We've already talked about how they were trained on a moving target from distance, high-powered rifle with a scope, triangulated field of fire. And that's exactly how it went down. So Eladio Del Val gets recruited. He's one of the, he's one of the shooters. He was recruited several times back and forth, CIA and organized crime as an assassin. So, here's Fabian naming names. And he even puts together kind of a network. You can see a lot of it emanates from Santos Trafficante, as you can see here in the center. We've talked about many of these people. My face is hiding one of these poor guys over here. Let me see if I can move it, if I can find my cursor. All right, who am I hiding here? Oh, Carlos Tepedino. I'll let it hide that because there's no picture there, and we have not talked about him. But a lot of these other ones we have. We've talked about Rolando Masfer. We've talked about Carlos Prio, one of the former presidents of Cuba. We've talked about, if you go down here at the bottom, Frank Sturgis, Jack Ruby, Herminio Diaz, the guy we just discussed. How about the guy directly at the bottom, Bernard Barker, one of the Watergate burglars. John Martino, the guy William Pauly was talking to on the yacht. This Rip Robertson here on the bottom. Whoops. A trainer at the Murchison Ranch. He trained the S-Force. CIA guy, David Morales. Talked to William Harvey. My goodness. Robert Mayhew. Howard Hughes' attorney helped put the S-Force together. Sheffield Edwards at the meeting when they finally get Santos Trafficante to agree to put the S-Force together. He's the CIA rep Nixon sent. And you got Alan Dulles, top left, Richard Bissell, number 2 in the CIA. I mean, all these guys are connected. We've talked about all of them, pretty much. There's probably a couple in here we haven't, but we talked about most of them. And so this is the beauty of this report by Fabian Escalante. And one of the things that he does a good job of is identifying the role that the Cubans played. His spy network had accurately diagnosed how this was working. You know, the folks that were organizing and everything was the CIA. A lot of the folks that were paying for a lot of this was organized crime. But the folks that were doing all the work, the instruments, the mechanics that are actually doing the dirty work, were largely these anti-Castro Cubans. If you go back throughout all these operations that we've discussed in this, you know, we've done 88, this is our 88th episode. So somewhere in these 88 episodes, we've discussed all of these, right? Operation 40, that was a CIA operation that recruited Santos Traficante's soldiers into their operation and paid them as CIA assets, which is, you know, but they're his guys. They're anti-Castro Cubans that were recruited by the CIA. Operation Zapata, which is official code name for Bay of Pigs. Again, these were CIA trained anti-Castro Cubans from the Cuban Revolutionary Council. All right. Again, anti-Castro Cubans. Operation Mongoose, the changed name, right? You know, Mongoose was really just Operation 40 extended with a new name. Again, they're using their base is down in Miami at JM Wave on the University of Miami campus, and they're using these same anti-Castro Cubans from the Castro opposition front. It's the same people. And then the S-Force, when the CIA sends Sheffield Edwards down and they conspire with the organized crime families, heads of the families, they talk to Santos Trafficante, put this assassination team together. He calls it the S-Force, named after Santos. What does he do? He just recruits back the Operation 40/Operation Mongoose people that he knew. They were his guys that he had loaned to the CIA. He recruits them back to be in the S-Force. Herminio Diaz is one of them. Frank Sturgis, all these. And then the assassination of JFK, according to Fabian Escalante, was accomplished by this S-Force. And who is the S-Force? It's the same guys. It's these Operation 40, Operation Mongoose, these CIA assets that were recruited from Santos Traficante's foot soldiers. And they're all anti-Castro Cubans refugees came from Cuba and fled to Miami. And then eventually, if you fast forward all the way to Watergate, it's the same guys. It's the same guys. This is why Nixon panics, you know, and why in the tapes he keeps talking about the Bay of Pigs, Bay of Pigs, Bay of Pigs guys, Bay of Pigs guys. It's going to reopen that. Of course it is, because he knew 4 of the 5 burglars were Cubans, were S-Force. 3 of the 5 were S-Force members, and 2 of the other 2 that were caught over in the hotel as the lookouts, E. Howard Hunt and G. Gordon Liddy. G. Gordon Liddy wasn't. He was former FBI, but E. Howard Hunt, my goodness, remember he said he's the key. You know, lock everything. They figure out who E. Howard Hunt is. Of course, E. Howard Hunt was one of these original S-Force guys that trained, you know, out the Everglades and these other bases. So it's the same people. So that's my point. I've said this so many times, I've lost count now. I know I'm naming 5 conspirators, and people roll their eyes and they say, oh, how could all those people coordinate? Well, 3 of those are like one. because they're all working in tandem, they're working together with one another. And so, yes, I separate the CIA from the anti-Castro Cubans from organized crime, but they've all been working together in these operations since the late 50s. Why would they all of a sudden, they all have motive what JFK killed. I think we've established motive for all three of them, you know, uh, and they've been trying to kill Castro. So why would they turn and just change targets now and now target JFK? So it's really not five separate ones. It's three total. You got the deep state and all their machinations, all the people involved with that, with the big companies that depend on constant war, the military industrial congressional complex. You got the power brokers there, the Joint Chiefs, CIA and the FBI. Well, then you got this amalgamation of anti-Castro Cubans, organized crime figures, and these CIA operators who really kind of just form one conspirator. And since the CIA is involved, that's part of the deep state. So you could really say it's this one big entity. You know, they all have their disparate motives, but they all have motive, no doubt about it. And then they use these anti-Castro Cubans as their foot soldiers. And of course, the organized crime figures are paying for a lot of this through their skims off their casinos and things of that nature. What about Bobby Kennedy in the aftermath of the assassination when he gets the word from J. Edgar Hoover that his brother is dead? It's interesting who his suspects are. So we've just learned who Fabian Escalante's suspects are. It's the CIA, he names names. It's organized crime, he names names. And it's these anti-Castro Cubans, and he names a couple of shooters. All right. This is the report he gives to Castro. And Castro knows all these people. And he knows all the background, what's been going on. So that's Fabian Escalante's investigation, the names that he came up with. How about Bobby? Bobby's three suspects were in order: CIA, Mafia, Cubans. He comes up with the exact same suspect list as Fabian Escalante. And immediately, like in the minutes afterward, he gets off the phone with J. Edgar Hoover. He calls John McConnell with the CIA and says, I want you to come over to the house and meet. I want to talk to you. And when he gets over there, he just confronts him. Tell me your guys didn't do it. He immediately suspects the CIA is involved. Of course, John McCone doesn't know what he doesn't know. He's just kind of a placeholder. He denies everything. But boy, Kenny didn't believe him. Kenny wanted to see him when he looked in his eyes. He says, I want you to come over to the house and we're going to meet face to face. Then he sends Walter Sheridan to Chicago to look into the organized crime aspect because he knows J. Edgar Hoover's not going to look into organized crime. J. Edgar Hoover's friends with organized crime. He didn't believe Cosa Nostra even exists. And he ain't going to look into it. So he sends his own investigator, convinced that they're involved. And then he calls Enrique Harry Ruiz Williams, who is one of his confidants in the anti-Castro Cuban community. And he just tells him straight up. He says, one of your guys did it. This is him pictured here with Bobby. And one of your guys did it. And so he hasn't had any time to compare notes with a Fabian Escalante or anything. So here you have Bobby Kennedy, who's the head of the law enforcement infrastructure in our country. He's the sitting attorney general. And he immediately suspects CIA, Mafia, Cuban exiles. And then Fabian Escalante, who's kind of his counterpart in Cuba, and in the months after the assassination, investigates through his network of spies, and he comes independently to the exact same conclusion. Even more specific, he gets down and names names. I think that is really important. And, because then the Warren Commission is going to come out and fuzzy it all up. The only name they're going to name is Lee Harvey Oswald, which is patently ridiculous. So if you're asking me who I believe, who I think is credible, I think Bobby's pretty credible. Uh, I think Fabian Escalante is pretty credible. I don't believe the Warren Commission at all. In fact, I sort of operate under the assumption that they were part of the cover up. And so they're just as responsible for uh, us not knowing the truth. In fact, they're most responsible. The Warren Commission. Now you can say, well, they didn't have access to all the evidence. That's true, they didn't. The FBI, as we said, they shoehorned all the evidence, and then you got this filter sitting there named Alan Dulles who's keeping anything out that could incriminate the CIA in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, but it was their job to get to the bottom of this, and they didn't do it. And they produced an 888-page monstrosity that was fiction. I would take Fabian Escalante's book over the Warren Commission, the Warren Report, any day, and twice on Sunday. So, what are the payoffs for these anti-Castroite Cubans? Well, obviously revenge. The betrayals. They're not going to get anything out of Kennedy, and they know it. And so they've adjusted their plan. Now he's become an obstacle. They're going to have to take him out if they're going to ever have a chance of taking Castro out. So, if they can at some point replace Kennedy with somebody who they know is anti-Castro, sufficiently anti-Castro, won't waffle on him, won't change his mind on him, that would be great. But primarily, they just want revenge. So that they get that. They also end the back channel that the Kennedy government had begun with Castro and the Castro government. It just ends when LBJ becomes president. Castro reaches out to the intermediaries one time to the new U.S. government just to gauge their interests. Are you willing to continue what Kennedy's? No, it was crickets. Never heard another word. And then after LBJ decides not to run in 68 and Nixon wins in 68, they've got the guy they should have probably supported back in 60. They're back with Nixon again, the tried and true Nixon. And so, though they don't ever get what they ultimately want, which is Castro killed or overthrown, at least it's not, they chose poorly in their view in 60 with Kennedy. They got screwed on that. And so all of their efforts got basically delayed by 8 years. And then here comes Nixon again in 68, and they know what they're going to get out of Nixon. And so they've essentially replaced JFK with Nixon. Took a few years, but they essentially did that. So they have somebody who's back on their side again. Now, by that time, things have changed. The Cold War is different, and Cuba is, the bigger picture at that point is Vietnam. Nixon's trying to extricate us from Vietnam, and so that's sort of agenda number one. In 60, agenda number one was Cuba, but times have changed. And so they sort of missed their chance. In their view, they made a poor choice in 60 supporting JFK, and it caused them to miss their opportunity. But boy, they got revenge. They got revenge. So that's the conclusion of conspirator number 3. And we have now been able to identify 3 of the conspirators. And I'm proud to say that, 2 of mine so far agree with Fabian Escalante and Bobby Kennedy. Actually all 3 of them do. Now, neither one of them identify the deep state, right? I include that because I think we haven't got totally through the Vietnam aspect of the angle of this, but we will in the next conspirator when we talk about LBJ, how important that was in the overall scheme of this and the thinking that went into this. Vietnam played a central role. Well, organized crime didn't really care about Vietnam. That wasn't foremost in their thinking. The anti-Castro-Cubans didn't care about Vietnam. They probably saw Vietnam as a diversion from what they wanted. Um, but there's some other folks that cared very deeply about Vietnam. And National Security Action Memo 263 is JFK's way of getting out of Vietnam, preventing a Vietnam War. And that can't be allowed to happen. Vietnam War has been in the planning stages for a long time. CIA's not going to let that happen. Joint Chiefs not going to let that happen. So, and of course, these big companies that profiteer off constant warfare aren't going to let that happen. So that's why I included the deep state, which we defined as the national security apparatus and the companies that feed it, or the corporations that feed it. And of course, included in that's the FBI and the CIA. And we've seen time and time again how the FBI just corrupts this whole investigative process around the JFK assassination. Just absolutely corrupts it. And so, what would be the motive of the FBI? Well, J. Edgar Hoover hated JFK. He's always having to answer Bobby Kennedy's phone. He's always having to use blackmail to keep his job with JFK. And bottom line, they just didn't like each other. There's a lot of personal animus there. So it's in his, and of course, they're going after organized crime, right? Bobby is as Attorney General. And that was not something FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover wanted to do at all. It would expose him. So he had plenty of personal motive to sit still and let the assassination happen and cover things up at the end. He didn't have to actually shoot him. He just helped with the cover up and not say anything in advance that would protect him before it happened. So FBI's got a lot of motive in especially personally when it comes to J. Edgar Hoover. But anyway, that was our first conspirator, deep state. And then second one was organized crime. And all of these guys get a payoff. All of these conspirators get a huge payoff when JFK dies. And the third one is the anti-Castro-Cubans. So tomorrow we'll move into conspirator 4, which is LBJ. And boy, some people get hot when you start talking about LBJ, a president being involved in the assassination of another president. So just keep an open mind. We'll go through the evidence, and I think it'll paint a pretty clear picture of his role in all of this as well. And of course, it's going to bring in the Vietnam part. That's to help complete that picture as well. All right, so that's episode 88. Check out my website, sphistory.com. Feel free to subscribe to this channel. It's free. There's no cost involved. And hit the thumbs up and the notification bell. And I'm going to go in and check comments here a little bit from yesterday and try to respond accordingly. I enjoy reading the comments. So hope everybody has a great day. Until tomorrow, everybody enjoy the day. Thank you.